welcome back to our Solar Power Summit. I hope you enjoyed the break, and I hope you enjoyed as much as we did the previous session with the very uplifting speech of Fatih Birol and the distinguished panel, which was discussing how we best make this opportunity happening, which we have in Europe's Green Deal. So for now, I welcome you to the session, which will discuss about the stepping stones to a 100% renewable system. In our 100% Renewable Europe study, which is the first of its kind, we showed the pathways to a 100% renewable system, which is also the cheapest option, leading us up to a decarbonized energy system in Europe by 2050. We would like to deep dive together with you into the stepping stones for such a 100% renewable system. And I'm very happy to introduce to you Michael Schmäler, who is the executive advisor and also head of our market intelligence unit here at Solar Power Europe. Michael, I'd let you pick with your panel into the stepping stones together with your co-moderator, and we're very happy to follow your discussions from the studio here.
Super, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, welcome everyone. So I'm very glad to have with us for this distinguished panel, Christoph Sutter, who's the head of Axpo Group, Switzerland's largest producer of renewable energy and an international leader in energy trading and the marketing of solar and wind power. I'm really happy also to have with us Frauke Thies, who's actually a former colleague of mine at Solar Power Europe, and for a couple of years now the executive director of Smarten, and as the name already indicates, that's the European Association of Smart Energy. That's what we need. Technology giant Huawei probably does not need an introduction. They are also a global market leader for solar inverter technology and represent the board member of Solar Power Europe. We're happy to have with us Hariram Subramanian, who's the CTO of Huawei's European Solar Group. I'm happy to have with us Martin Hackel, who is a board member of Solar Power Europe. He is the global business director of Austrian company Fronius, actually one of the European pioneers in solar inverter technology, active for decades, and also active in hydrogen technology. And last but not least, I'm also very glad to have and welcome my co-moderator for today, Stephen Woodhouse. He's director of AFRI Management Consulting, where he works now for over 20 years on energy market disruption, challenging the old way of doing things. We want to discuss that. So we have 60 minutes together today. First 10 minutes will be a kickoff presentation. Then we have the panel, and in the end, we have a Q&A. Please, if you have any questions, use the control panel of GoToWebinar, and we will pick up the questions and ask them to the audience. So let's start with the intro presentation of Huawei Fusion Solar Europe CTO Hariram Subramanian, providing background on leading energy digitalization for a smart and sustainable world. Hariram, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. A very good morning, good afternoon to all the listeners, and it's a pleasure to speak, as always, with Solar Power Summit in 2020. The idea is for me to give you and connect some dots for today's meeting, and I want to walk briefly through some of the ideas and points, and also give an introduction of what we are doing. So as everybody is aware of, we are a leading provider of ICT infrastructure and smart devices with quite a lot of R&D background in technology development, R&D, and also in product that has been used in quite a variety of applications, not just in ICT, but also in energy-related areas. Our key value proposition is to build a fully connected and intelligent world. So that is actually the key, let's say, proposition from our side. So that is bringing different technologies from ubiquitous computing, connectivity, intelligence, and also taking a leading role in digital platform, and also bringing in, let's say, technology into small appliances through variety of methods, from power electronics to communication and connectivity. Actually, what is happening right now is that we are going more into, let's say, a modernized society, and energy is getting more and more importance. So in order to enable this kind of modernization, and also to bring in connectivity very close to each other, and also to have convenience in transportation, it is imperative to have, let's say, cleaner energy. As of now, let's say, most of the energy sources in variety of locations are, let's say, in fossil-based, and also there are a lot of equipments and machines that are actually consuming quite a lot of energy. And typical one is data center, for example, consuming quite a lot of global power, and also vehicles that are actually contributing not only to emissions, but also it needs more and more innovation to bring in this kind of technology evolution. So we will see actually what we are actually trying to do here. But before that, let's bring in some challenges that the industry is facing. I mean, it's clear that we are talking about climate change. There are a lot of questions that needs to be answered. I mean, how to use clean energy in a better way, and how can we reduce the carbon emissions to ease the global warming, and also new energy and electric vehicles coming into picture. So how can we better use these kind of technologies? And also one important thing is to do O&M activities during external contingencies and emergencies. How to do it? So this calls for digitalization and a lot of planning through digital means. And the most imperative thing is power grid system stability and security. So these are actually a lot of changes that's happening from the power industry side. And how can things be, let's say, enabled through digital technologies to bring in energy security, and also to improve resilience and also reliability in the systems. So these are challenges, but obviously challenges brings opportunities. I always say that we are talking about renewable technology, but the core mover of the renewable technology is the sun. Let's look it also from the wind perspective, because it's also the sun that makes also the wind to blow. So it's something where a little bit interesting to think that the energy sources is available quite far away from us, but it could be tapped and utilized in a more efficient way to bring in the renewable change. And water is also very important here, as it was well said very, very long time ago that water would be the coal of the future by the science fiction writer. So it's actually very interesting to see, like, all the fundamental elements will play a role in bringing in this energy transition that we are seeing. So the most important topic is also to look into how this can be addressed. So it means bringing in different industry, not just a generation perspective, to bring in renewables, and also to bring in, let's say, decarbonizing hard sectors like heavy industry, chemistry, or chemical companies, and so on, and also put renewables into transportation, and also to manage the demand side better, like how to manage data centers, and how to make, let's say, energy efficiency there in data centers. So this is also getting more and more imperative now. And I always say that with the PV, we are distributed. That means you are located in different locations, but it is a giant power source. I mean, when it acts together, when it is communicating with each other, it could be giant, and it can provide a lot of power, actually, that the world needs in a better way. So this is actually the way to think. And from our side, what we are doing in order to help this this segment, from our side, we are working on 3 topics, from devices, connectivity, and computing. and everything goes into the so-called digital power platform, and bringing in this platform for different kinds of applications, from telecom power application, from data center facilities, smart PV photovoltaics to our inverters and converter systems, mobile power, and modular power supplies like embedded power that goes into some other power devices and systems. So we see that digital power is getting the cornerstone, and basically not just improving the efficiency, but also bringing in a key connectivity into this digital power. So there is also very important topic actually, which is availability of these energy sources. Yeah, because you have electronics, and once you put electronics, there needs to be high amount of reliability there and high amount of availability. So be it in the telecom side, where the quality of service and the availability is extremely high, and also being it into the infrastructure facility like data center, for example, and also in energy generation through photovoltaics. So this is very important, and this availability should be provided under all circumstances. It's more important when renewable is being tapped, and actually it is imperative to have this circumstances and energy generation all the time. So for that perspective, we actually predicted quite a lot of interesting things. I think this was also published in quite a lot of journals and articles and magazines. We looked into the trends that will become, I mean, no, we are just talking 2025, but this will be actually leveraged. So we looked into from digitalization, AI, grid support, storage, and also virtual power plants where digitalization comes into picture, active safety, and also we looked into what kind of technology will come from the technology development, like high power density, modularity, and bringing in security and trustworthiness into the system and into the products actually. And so how can the system look like? I mean, when we are thinking about integrating everything to have renewables 100%, we need to not just think from the supply side, but also in the demand side, and also manage these things in a better way. So we are looking a little bit into this aspect, as you can see here from this slide. I mean, to have a certain amount of DC transmission, certain then going into some AC transmission, and also trying to convert energy into, like say, power to gas, and also looking into aspects on EV. So if you look into this and also integrate data center for demand side management, I think we could achieve the targets in step-by-step phase. And I think I'm happy to discuss more about these topics, how to see this in an integrated environment during this panel session, and also happy to interact with everyone here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hariram. I think you already mentioned several of the points we want to discuss. So we've basically outlined or structured the panel in four big topics which we want to discuss. So first, 100% renewable Europe, how we get there. Second, we want to go a little bit into electrification, and then we want to talk hydrogen and storage. So let's start with the big picture. If in our 2050 report, our partner LUT University from Finland modeled that going 100% renewables by 2050 is, as Valborga already mentioned, favorable both from a cost and climate perspective to meet Brussels and Paris targets. As you can see on these two slides, on the left capacity and on the right actually power needs, you will see that the numbers are, the capacities we need for solar, yellow, and wind are huge, and the numbers are almost mind-boggling. So in the moderate scenario, which forecasts 100% renewables by 2050, the model has shown that we would need 7.7 terawatt of installed solar capacity in Europe, not only in the EU, but in Europe. We are at around 150 gigawatt plus today. So it not only sounds a lot, it's almost hard to believe. what I want to say here is just go 10 years back and then just think who at that time would have believed where solar is today and at what cost solar would be today. Probably hardly anyone would have believed that today, both globally and in Europe, solar is the power generation source, still on a low level, but it is still that power generation source that adds most capacity every year. So let's now discuss how we can manage or go towards accelerating the deployment of renewables. Maybe to Frauke and Martin first. So from today to 2050, and I think that's what we discussed also in Brussels now, 2030 emerges as a critical milestone, and we will have the new, more ambitious targets for 2030 soon. So Frauke, maybe you first. What issues do you see for a 100% renewables scenario that we've modeled here?
Thanks a lot, Michael. And I think I see two main issues. In a way, if we look at what we've come or where we've come from, we've made massive progress with renewables in the electricity sector. And yet, I would argue that from a systems perspective, that was the easy part, because renewables fit quite nicely into the mix that we already had. If we look to 2030 now, we will really feel a change as renewables move beyond the roughly 30% that we have across Europe in the electricity system now. We'll see variability becoming a real topic to be managed in the European energy system. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, we might see ramp rates double within this time frame. We will probably need the same amount of dispatchable capacity, or I'd rather prefer calling it flexibility, in the system as we have today, but it will be used much less hours, obviously, because renewables are going to cover most of it. So variability is one challenge. The other is that we've made massive progress in electricity, but that's only a quarter of the energy system. And we've got to get this power into, or this clean power into the heating and transport and industry sectors. But in a way, these two challenges combined also make for a great opportunity, and that is sector integration, and sector integration done smartly. Because if we bring this clean electricity into heating, into transport, into industry, that also offers massive flexibility potentials. Already today, we're looking into smart charging of electric vehicles, including, by the way, vehicle-to-grid charging as well. So by charging the cars, depending on system signals and system requirements, they turn from a burden to a system to actually a support at many times. And the same goes for heating, especially in well-insulated buildings. Heating and cooling can really provide a buffer, and we might as well cool or heat the home during daytime when the sun is shining, to come home to a perfectly temperatured home as we wish, and have used the flexibility that this building heating system provides us. And this is, of course, it's not just science fiction. It's already something that we see very commonly applied today. We already have aggregators working with, be it aluminium smelters, be it water treatment plants, be it the HVAC of supermarkets, to manage them smartly and react to system needs without the energy user actually feeling any limitations to their needs and business, and by actually making money both for them as well as for energy users at large, because it brings down the system cost. So it is all possible. The incentive structures need to be there. The markets need to be open. These are elements that still need to happen, or need to happen more. But the potential is there. And just maybe to conclude this point, the European Commission estimates 160 gigawatts of demand response potential by 2030. Some would argue that is even a conservative estimate, depending on how fast we go ahead with the electrification of heating, transport, and industry.
Okay, thanks. Martin, if you look at it from a technical perspective, being a company that is providing solutions, so how are you seeing this massive numbers? Is this doable actually for the industry? You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. So, wait, you're still muted somehow. So,
sorry, I start again. Yes, there is a definite yes. The technology is widely here. Adding renewables is not the huge challenge. I think it's much more a commercial issue and organizational and structure issue than a technical issue. We are very far when it comes to solar industry and solar technology, wind technology. Yes, there is still a lot to do when it comes to synthetic fuels and hydrogen, all these kind of topics which will need further on this energy transition. And I see the huge challenges where we still did not prove that we can do it in such a huge range. This is all these sector integration technologies. Yeah? So adding renewables is one thing, as Frauke said, but having all the flexibilities on the mobility side, on heating, cooling side, and in the industry available in such a short time is also a challenge we need to meet. And further, I also would like to say that we also need to consider that the 100% renewable Europe would also considerate a massive energy saving process or potential we need to harvest and to get. And here I see much more difficulties also when it comes to putting that into place.
Okay. Christoph, maybe from your side actually on selling, distributing power, so renewable power, how do you see that you're basically at the juncture of getting this also out? So is this doable actually for you?
Thank you, Michael. I would agree with Martin. From a technical perspective, it's doable. I also agree with Frauke that probably the easy part, what we did the last years was the easy part, kind of going with the renewable share from close to zero to the level where we are. And it becomes more and more challenging from a technical perspective as well, but doable. You see, I think the variability now of PV and wind will become more and more a topic, obviously, once we reach a certain level of penetration in the system. We as Expo, we are active in about 30 European countries. We trade and manage about 15 gigawatts of renewable energy. So we are in that business from the trading side and see more and more variability in that space. But being kind of originating a Swiss company, if I look at the Swiss system, so the Swiss system we know best, and for a second I see Switzerland as part of Europe. Actually, in Switzerland, we have a very special and kind of comfortable situation to deal with the variability because, you know, we have about 50% hydro electricity today. And I think this, in our particular environment, it would be rather easy compared to other countries to combine the existing hydro we have with a lot of PV in the future, because we have this storage capacity already built in storage hydro or pump storage plants, which are already there. So we start from a comfortable situation within Switzerland. But now talking about Europe, I think what a key challenge will be, and it was already mentioned also, is kind of simply the economical challenge to do all these billions of investments and to create an investment framework where investors, I think the money is around, that's not the issue, but we need to create an investment environment where investors feel comfortable to put all these billions into these into this infrastructure, which will be massive. And there, one of the key challenges is obviously what is happening with the electricity prices. If I invest now in a few gigawatts of PV, for example, in Spain, just to take an example of a very hot market at the moment, will I be able to sell this electricity to an okay price, or will prices just collapse? Because on one hand, we cannot extract all this electricity power and everybody's producing at the same time, and markets crash. And I think there, also from an economical point of view, it makes a lot of sense to have the sector coupling, because the sector coupling brings you other kind of a price hedge, because you're not only dependent on the electricity price as we see it today, but as soon as you couple the sectors, you have also different ways to sell to.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. Maybe Hariram, briefly. So you mentioned a lot of challenges actually that need to be managed. So what's the key challenge actually that you're seeing to getting us to 100% renewables?
Yeah, actually, there are certain challenges that also needs to be addressed. So one important challenge, I mean, it was also, you also mentioned, Michelle, that that there is a capacity building that need to be done. But I think the question is not just capacity building, but it's also how to supply this capacity in variance. So that means you have a time variance, you have a space variance, and you need to match it. So that is a little bit of challenging here. And also the grid challenges comes into play. So that means, but it could be addressed through power electronics and control, but it's something that needs to be addressed. And also accuracy in forecasting is very important, where technology is there, but more and more digital services has to be enabled, because now, as of now, the amount of penetration is low, so the amount of forecasting is not so much looked upon. But once the penetration goes high, the forecasting gets more and more important. And so that brings in high amounts of digital services and energy management and planning, etc. And also from the technology to move more a little bit into application side, we need to see how can certain applications be deployed with, for let's take, for example, PV. How can land usage be reduced, for example? Yeah, how can we combine PV with other activities like agriculture, fishery, grazing, or doing floating? So this kind of application to bring in the technology is also important, and that's also something people need to think. So I think the challenges needs to be addressed, and there are means to address the challenges, and these means brings in opportunities, and it needs to be done in a systematic way and in a technologically advanced way to manage these kind of challenges.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm happy actually that all our panelists are pretty upbeat, are thinking technology is there, and it's just takes some combined efforts to get it going. Let's move into the details of the energy system.
Very good, Michael. Thank you for that. Stephen Woodhouse here. So we've been looking at the Solar Power Europe report, and we see a very high level of electrification underpinning the fully renewable system. And it looks to me, looking at the countries I know of, that's kind of a multiplier of 4 to 5 times the current capacity, the current energy needs for electricity. And even by 2030, we're looking at building between 1,000 and 2,000 gigawatts of solar capacity. So 2050 is a long way away. But electrification of the adjacent sectors like heating and transport, and the digital sectors with data centers is the obvious one. Moving on to electrification of, some of the chemical sectors. Are we doing enough today to start that process of electrification? So that's a question to each of the panelists. If I could start with Frauke.
Thank you, Stephen. The short answer is no. I don't think we're doing enough today to move ahead. I think the industry is there and is ready in large parts to electrify. The technology is there. The political incentive structures are not. And by that I mean, in particular, when looking at the heating sector, it's probably most evident. If installing a heat pump that may be 3 to 5 times more efficient than a conventional fossil gas boiler, for instance, you need to pay not only the electricity price and the network charges, that make sense, but you also have taxes, you have all sorts of other expenses on the electricity price, whereas the gas that goes straight into your gas boiler is subject to a small tax and nothing else. And this is clearly not comparable, and the scales of this aren't. And this is why electrification is taking up so slowly. And we can look into other sectors, into incentive structures for industry likewise. In many ways, electricity is still punished and made look more expensive than other fuels. So that is one of the key reasons why I think we're not doing enough. And then secondly is, of course, the question on how we can use this electrification smartly. Was making the link to the previous session where everybody, I think, was sharing the view that we need to have smart electrification, flexibility from electrification. Also there, I think a lot more is absolutely possible and needed. Again, the price signals are not sufficient to help us move ahead there. And then, for instance, just looking, yesterday I had a look in the European Commission's impact assessment on the 2030 targets and scaling up the targets. And it seems that despite all the very good story about smart sector integration and having this vision, when you look into the technical work of the Commission, it's still very much thinking in silos, thinking in sectors, looking, for instance, at buildings, at entities where you can do efficiency, where you can put renewables, but that do not interact with the electricity system at large. And the same for the other sectors. So there is still a lot to be done to break this silo thinking and really see the energy system as one, with electrification at its core. Yeah, maybe I stop here for now.
Thank you, Frauke. So, Christoph, allow me to ask you that question. What are we doing enough to electrify? But with a spin, what do the utilities need to be doing to accelerate the electrification process?
Given the challenge we have on the climate side, I also think we are not doing enough. We do not have the speed that would be adequate responding to the climate crisis we have. To your question, what utilities need to do, you see, I have more perspective on upstream utility. So we are into generation of electricity and trading of electricity on the wholesale market mainly. We do not really have a strong position in a kind of end customer utility business. And I think this is where a sector where a lot of things need to happen. It's just not where we are working. I think on heat pumps, so I think heat is an important sector that needs rapid electrification. Frauke also mentioned, especially the low temperature heat where heat pumps make a lot of sense. Maybe not so much on the high temperature side, where I guess we come into that in a minute when we talk about hydrogen. So we have other solutions there. But low temperature heat, like for housing and buildings, yeah, heat pumps are the way to go. And I think it's one reason kind of the whole building sector and housing sector is quite slow. Also, the rates of renewing the houses is just low. And I think that one of the key questions is how you can, with smart policies, how you can accelerate investments and refurbishments in the housing sector, including also heat pumps. Then.
Okay, so you see that as a policy-led move. So let me first ask Martin and then Hariram. So you guys, you're making the brains of the systems, the inverters with all of the control and electrification systems. What role do you see, those technologies playing in a 100% renewable system for the future, and how can we accelerate that? So let me start with Martin.
Yeah, I guess the inverter itself is maybe the most undervalued piece in a PV systems, and because everybody just sees the modules, but at the end of the day, inverter today does so many different things. I mean, besides of course, the DC-AC conversion of the electricity, it optimizes the yield. It's a monitoring and information center. It's coupling your house or your building with the grid, supports the grid with different kind of features when needed. And it's a kind of safety center for your electrical system. And most important, it manages nowadays all the energy flows within the building and with the loads. So controlling them, telling them if there is energy, and is storing energy if there is a battery connected. So yes, there is, it's much more. It's an extremely important component for everything what we plan in the future when it comes to bring solar energy into the grid. And I just wanted to highlight also from a manufacturer perspective, selling inverter systems to the market. Yes, the markets are very slow, as Christoph said before. We are still in a phase where only early adopters are building PV systems. So somebody who is really interested to be part of this energy transition, and to the huge mess of still empty roofs, for example, we still did not, let's say, contact them. We did not attract them so much. The benefit partly is so small. If somebody has a 50 euro electricity bill a month and he installs a PV system, so what's the real impact in his daily life besides to have a renewable energy system? And that's where we need to work on and bring the benefits, the economy as a whole, Europe as a whole, into each household.
Okay. And let me finally turn that question a little bit more complicated for Hariram. So the inverters can be part of the flexibility of the system, but if it's done badly, they can be part of the inflexibility. We're all aware of the rollout of solar PV in Germany, which had a cutout with 50.2 hertz, and we're now having to retrofit the inverters. So are the inverters ready for the system of the future? And do you even know what the system of the future will require of the inverters? So that's a question to Hariram.
Yeah, perfect. I think this is a very, very important topic, and Martin actually correctly said that the inverter nowadays are doing more things. It's not just converting DC to AC, but it's managing, it's doing controlling, and so on. But as of now, we are thinking that the inverter is just feeding some current to the grid, and there is some grid voltage which is already existing. But when we want to talk about a massive penetration of renewables through inverters, I think we have to think more and more in terms of, let's say, grid supporting features and grid sustaining features, not just supporting, but it needs to sustain for a long time. So this means we have to think more in terms of a voltage kind of a source rather than like a current source. So the inverter are able to provide the voltage source that is required. So it will be more like the systems are forming the grid rather than just follow the grid. So that is something which is very, very important that needs to come up. And I mean, we also talked about electrification. I see that we can even call it as the electrification of everything, that we want to electrify everything. So it means different kind of, let's say, equipments for different kind of application needs electrification. That also brings in another challenge, because the people who are used to work on these kind of systems needs to be trained to use modern systems, or it is up to the manufacturers like us to come with a system that is very easy, that is very quick, that can be installed, and also that is very, let's say, something like an app, and that means people can use it even with less knowledge and less training, because everyone has to use it. So these are certain things that needs to happen. And also what is important is when these kind of inverters comes, because as you know, there could be quite a lot of inverters, it's also important to think that the amount of metals and amount of, let's say, copper, aluminium, and iron used in these kind of inverters should go down. So this is something that can be thought of doing more with silicon, with power electronics, with technological innovation, and so that you can kick away all these kind of, let's say, energy intensive products that goes also into the inverter manufacturing. So there's quite a lot of things that needs to be done, and inverter is the most important thing, and we are moving now from more efficient to more and more reliable system. So that means we are also thinking now, we have to think about the mission profile of the PV power plant, not just 20 years or 25 years. It needs to work in a long, lasting way.
Yeah. So clearly moving in a direction of smarter. So I will hand over again back to Michael. Talk about hydrogen.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so hydrogen is, of course, the big buzzword these days. According to our report, hydrogen next to electrification becomes as of 2030 the next and second energy carrier. So I think it's an addition. It's important. And as you can see, it's not hydrogen alone. Hydrogen is also a platform, basically, for synthetic fuels. In the left graph, you see the mid-green, or the biggest parts of the bars actually being synthetic fuels. And this will be really an essential bridge to decarbonize some industrial processes. And we will also see that synthetic fuels will be mostly used for, at least according to our report, for heavy transportation, such as aviation, maritime, while in the car or in the road sector, that means normal vehicles will be obviously using batteries simply because the efficiency is higher. I think what's interesting is actually also on this slide is simply that the final energy demand for transport, if you use synthetic fuels, or if you look at basically everything which is non-road, is increasing because the efficiency is lower than for the road part, where it will be batteries, simply because the efficiency is so much higher for electrified products that simply the energy demand is also decreasing. I think we have to take that also into consideration. So let's talk a little bit about hydrogen. The European Commission has recently introduced its 2030 hydrogen strategy. Several member states are creating national plans to be really the first, and it looks like it's almost now a race that's starting, and that's not only in Europe. You see also Australia really big on the map. They even want to export it to the Asian continent. So these are the discussions that are going on. So how, and I think that goes to all of you, how do you look at this hydrogen plan for the EU? Is this the right strategy? So comes it maybe not even a bit too early, because as we see, we're actually having such a huge challenge actually getting renewables installed and getting things electrified. So comes the second step before the first, or does it also take its time? So maybe comments to all of you. Maybe Frauke, you first.
Thanks, Michael. I think, well, I would very much agree already with the way that that you're phrasing the question, because yes, I agree that hydrogen will play an important role. Actually, looking here at the transport figures, I'm surprised by how high the role is according to the research you commissioned. But I agree that there are sectors that can simply not be directly electrified, and that's where hydrogen has its role. And in that respect, I think the European proposals on hydrogen at their core make sense with their focus on green hydrogen, with, at least in the storyline, also the idea to focus on hard to abate, how to otherwise electrify or decarbonize sectors. Yes. At the same time, I get the impression that currently in our hydrogen discussions, Europe is getting carried away a bit. There almost seems to be a hype on what hydrogen can all do and what it means for infrastructure, and that we might be able to use all the gas infrastructure we now have to transfer hydrogen in the future. And I think this is where we need to be very careful, because again, electricity, direct electrification, will always be more efficient where it is possible to use it. Hydrogen is only for those cases that cannot be directly electrified. Yes, it might have to play a role for seasonal storage in the long term, but again, here we're talking about the very long term. So let's take hydrogen for what it is, and that is, it should be green hydrogen, and it should be used only in those segments where nothing else is possible. We probably need to start developing it now. The technology isn't just as easy, and the infrastructure isn't just as easy. So yes, it's the right thing to start, but let's not get carried away. Let's not get swept away with the hype. The priority is direct electrification.
Okay, thanks, Frauke. Yeah, and that's maybe let's come to Christoph. Being actually in the power business, so do you think so now that we're seeing this momentum in hydrogen, and we will see actually if we get carried away or not, because of course there is this race going on at the moment. So how can we make sure, and how do you think it is possible that that we can really also make sure that we stay green, and that it's not at the moment everything is even gray, so that means all the hydrogen we have basically is being produced from fossil fuels, that we maybe not have to go through this sort of in-between step of having to use blue hydrogen, so that we have to use extraordinarily expensive and not unproven technologies like carbon capture. And so how can we do that?
I'm actually not too concerned that if we go to a path of really increasing our hydrogen consumption, that it will be not green hydrogen. I think there's many questions, as Frauke mentioned, how fast we will get there, how important hydrogen will be, and I'm totally with Frauke that this is a second priority. First priority must be direct use of electricity. But I also agree with your study. If you want to go 100% carbon neutral, and you need the hydrogen for certain sectors, heavy transport, feedstock for industrial processes, etc. But again, I'm not too concerned. I have a lot of question marks. How do we get to that transition? Also from an economical point of view, we are far away today from having robust business cases in the hydrogen sector, and apart from the old hydrogen economy, which was always here, but there are all these new applications now. But there is a potential that we really can bring drastically the cost down. I would assume it will be green, because the cheapest way of producing electricity these days is renewables, if you do it at the right location with the right spots. And I think so it will be, if we will have a hydrogen economy, or to a large extent hydrogen, then the electricity will come from PV and wind. And And I think especially also the combination. You see one of the economical drivers is how can you utilize your hydrogen electrolyzers. And for example, one point there I would see would be an interesting thing to see how you can combine PV and wind plants to produce hydrogen in future, just to have a high utilization rate of the electrolyzers.
Okay, good point. So Hariram, so I think Huawei is producing, I think annually inverter capacities in the double-digit gigawatt scale. So the question with hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, is obviously also one on competitiveness. Scale and competitiveness, these are the two things. Germans even want to import actually green hydrogen from North Africa. The question is, according at least to our report, that would be even not needed, both from a cost point, but especially from a cost point of view. But how do you see that actually being in the market and are really on the cutting edge of cost improvements?
Yes, I think first when we see, let's say, electricity generation, I think what is important is that you match the supply and the demand. And with hydrogen, you have an inherent, let's say, storage capacity. Let's say it has its own possibility to do this. So you don't have, I mean, because the PV you generate and you need to consume, it has to be done at the same time. And I think there are certain things that is quite very interesting, I would say, as I was talking also about the demand side management. And I think electrolyzer is something very useful in the power systems because it has some advantages actually. You know, it's quite fast, so you can try to switch on, switch it off quite quickly. And it could be used for grid balancing in a better way. So that is, I mean, it's clear that everyone talked that if the hydrogen is to be created, it should come from renewable. And once it comes from renewable, and in order to match, let's say, the grid capacity, it could be done in a better way to manage the demand side in a more effective way. Could also be integrated in data centers here. And there's also a possibility to think to convert back again through fuel cells and feed back again as electrical power. So there's a lot of potential here, and we think that this could be more beneficial in the long term to bring in more renewables in the end.
Okay, and briefly, Martin, I think so most people, when they think about hydrogen, they think about really big scales, but actually Fronius is also active working on hydrogen on a distributed level in homes. How's the potential for these solutions? Probably not too many have that on their radar.
Yes, I think the potential for distributed and local systems is still totally underestimated, especially when you see hydrogen as a kind of self-consumption. So why should not a logistic company produce its own hydrogen for the trailers? Why should a farmer not produce hydrogen for his tractor harvesting machines? The reason always, which is mentioned, is cost. But cost is only, let's say, it's not 100% true, this argument, because we know that the production of hydrogen itself carries around 40% of the costs of the final hydrogen price. So then there is 10% left for the compression of hydrogen, around 15% for the transport of the hydrogen, and then 40% again for the local distribution of hydrogen. So if you take all the rest out, you can be competitive in a local production of hydrogen, and that would change the approach totally, because you do not need the gas grid for that. And a huge advantage is that you can use the local renewable sources without pushing them through grids which are still not here, electricity grids, in order to bring them to huge electrolyzers. And another nice effect would be that because we always speak about the efficiency of hydrogen, or producing hydrogen, and that's one of the weakest points hydrogen has, or the re-electrification of hydrogen has. But if you see it from a decentralized position, you have much more opportunities to use the waste heat. Yeah, the waste heat you produce in electrolyzing and then with the electrolyzer or in re-electrifying, you always have around hot water of 80, 90 degrees, which you can use for heat processes if there are some, but you have much more opportunities when there are buildings around and people living. So yes, I think that there is a huge potential if you see the system from a different side. And I would advise not to make the same error as or let's say the same mistake we did in photovoltaic in the beginning, because we always thought in the beginning PV needs to act like a huge atomic power plant or a coal power plant. Nowadays we know the treasure is in the decentralized intelligence and controlling the system and supplying in, energy. And I think we can do the same or something similar with hydrogen. If we would have been able to produce hydrogen 50 years ago, there would be no gas grid in Europe, because everybody would produce the hydrogen, let's say, at home, in the industry, in the company.
Very good.
Okay, thanks. So then let's move to the final part. I think we're almost running out of time, but bear with us for a few more minutes so that we can also capture battery storage. And Stephen.
And Martin, I'd like to, sorry, Christopher, I'd like to pick up on that point about decentral intelligence. So battery storage, according to the Solar Power Europe's 100% renewable report, will end up playing a very big role in flexibility. So in a system, in the context of a 17,000 terawatt hour electricity system in Europe, we're seeing between 4,000 and 5,000 terawatt hours of battery storage capacity, which is huge. What are we doing to get there? Are we doing the right things? So let me start with Martin on that.
Sorry, what was the exact question, please?
Martin, are we doing enough to accelerate the deployment of storage systems?
I guess it's the same as we discussed before with the PV systems. I'm sure we are still not doing enough. Currently, most battery systems which are installed or used in order to increase the self-consumption of a prosumer, or to bring, let's say, the solar energy from the day to the night. And we still did not unlock all the potential of battery systems when it comes to benefits for the grid in order to work better. There we are, let's say, starting from almost zero.
Okay, so I think this is the point you were making about decentral intelligence. I mean, our existing electricity system is designed around a kind of predict and provide mentality. I was taught when I came into electricity 25 years ago, it's different from everything else. You cannot store it, so the supply must balance demand at all times. Everybody on the grid shares the same frequency, so it's a common good. You can't distinguish the reliability of different users or different applications, and customers can't be expected to contract or predict their consumption in advance. And with digital tools and technologies, I think every one of those three statements is now false. And we could design a radically different electricity system, embedding DC systems, as we saw Hariram mention earlier, and where we don't have predict and provide, but we have different levels of reliability for the different applications in your household. So your EV charger doesn't need the same second by second levels of reliability that the other parts of your house would need. So where do we go with this kind of distributed intelligence? Do we see a battery on every house and a battery with every solar system? Is that where we're going, towards a much more microgrid world? So Frauke, you know, I think this is your kind of territory. Where do we go with this distributed intelligence?
Thanks very much, Stephen. And I think indeed the description that both Martin and you provided is very much the big challenge we have today, that people install their battery systems in order to maximize self-consumption, to minimize costs for electricity purchases, and that's what the incentive structures are. And that per se requires a certain amount of intelligence, because you have to optimize your system on site, in your home, in your business, whatever it is. But that's about it. And there is so much more that could be done in interacting with the system. And I think that's where we have to move everything. And that is quite a fundamental change in business models and in incentive structures. Because today, really, the business case is minimize interaction with the system. Whereas the business case has to be maximize interaction with the system, react to it, use the battery storage at times not to store the excess power generation that you have, but it may actually be useful at a certain point to inject that excess power generation, because that's what the system needs. Use the battery later, or even discharge it to supply more to the system. So these are that's where we need to go, and that all depends on intelligence signals from the system. And above all, that means that market participants, energy users, small as they may be, need to be able to participate in the market. And that can be done via two ways. Either they receive dynamic price signals that are smartly reflecting really close to real time what the system needs, or they can explicitly participate in the market. And that usually happens by help of some service provider, an aggregator, the supplier who offers an aggregator function. It doesn't matter who, but a service provider who basically operates the flexibility on the customer side and brings this to the market and valorize it to the distribution system operator, to the wholesale market, to other energy suppliers who need to balance their portfolio. And that's where we need to go. So fundamental shift in incentive structures and business models actually for the self-consumers, self-generators, storage owners. And then I think a second dimension is, of course, the question, Stephen, about how much reliability does a customer need, and can there be different elements about somebody saying, well, I actually have my ability to be switched off for a couple of seconds because I'm a customer that is not sensitive to that. So that's a whole different discussion that can also be part of this either implicit price-driven, I react, and if prices go very high, I go off-grid for a moment. Or it can be the explicit market part. I contract, for instance, with the system operator, that he can take me off for a moment because I'm self-sufficient, and therefore he can protect his system. So those are additional dimensions which I think can be very well integrated into a system where consumers interact with the system implicitly or explicitly.
That sounds like a very well orchestrated system, which I think brings us to the very next slide, the final slide for this session, looking at 100% renewable energy. If we could move to the next slide, please. Moving to a 100% renewable energy system. I remember back 10 years ago, it's now 11 years ago, when we did the first deep intermittency study for Britain and Ireland, when we were previously named POIRI or Peru. We had some graphs that showed the variability of the system. The study that's just been done by Solar Power Europe shows a very well orchestrated system here. A question to Christoph. There are still fears that as we move towards 100% renewables, we won't be able to keep the lights on. How do you look at this, and what's your company's strategy in that space?
I think we have to differentiate between good times and not so good times. I think in good times, with the European system, very well connected electricity system, different ways of generating electricity, like offshore wind in the sea, and PV in the south, and all the interconnections, and all the the smart technology we have, Frauke just mentioned, to manage the short-term variability, I don't see a big issue. I think that's manageable. I see more an issue when it comes to seasonal changes, seasonal different positions, but not on the short-term side. But on where I see a bit the challenge is for the days where we do not have the not so good days, and it was for me it was the whole COVID experience in Europe. For me was some warning. I was really puzzled to see how quickly national borders become important again when the crisis is coming up, like the COVID crisis we had. And all the nations again looking for on their own and up to the border. And if you kind of think about the similar crisis we have in an electricity system or energy system, and then national borders would become important again, or being locked for electricity supply for whatever reasons. Yeah, what do we do then? Because I think it can work nicely as a European system if the systems would be cut to national systems. There I would see a problem. So, and it's a bit political question. Do you want to build a system that also works in a crisis mode as a national system? At what cost? Or do you think only in the big system for the normal days in European level?
And I very much echo that. You know, the coordinated, intelligent, smart energy system definitely doesn't have borders. And I sit in a country where I fear borders are coming down on the internal energy market. But I'm looking towards a much more positive future than that. So I'll hand back to Michael to ask the closing question. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, let's maybe one short question. We are already quite a bit over time. So everyone, if you had a wish actually to the administration, in particular the European administration, but also other policymakers, to make things happen until 2030 so that we are on the right path to meet the 2050 targets, because as we're seeing in the media every day, there are so many things happening that might turn and cannot be changed back. And so when we look at climate change, so the next 10 years are really crucial to really get things going. So what do we have to do? What do policymakers to do that the companies, that the industry can actually deploy their technology which is there, or develop those things that are not there but are actually doable, as we just learned. So maybe let's start with Hariram first. Everyone, only one sentence, please. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, let me repeat, sorry about that. What is needed is a very high amount of digitalization here in power systems and power sector.
Okay, thanks. Martin?
I would wish that after signing the Paris Agreement 2015, 5 years ago, in the next 5 years, we produce more than papers. And I really would wish that energy communities become a real success, because it will allow us to onboard each person in Europe on the energy transition.
Okay. Christoph?
If we want to create a hydrogen economy, we need to start now and need a stable frame for investments and support mechanisms for doing that.
Okay. Frauke, final words of the panel?
Break out of the silos and look at system efficiency together. And that means, among other things, giving also a formal role to flexibility and recognizing that.
Wonderful.
And I'm
Thanks.
going to jump in as well, and I will say, abandon the concept of security standards for the new types of demand that we're going to electrify. They can accept different security standards. If we try to apply the old security standards and the old predict and provide model to the new demands, it will be impossible to do cost effectively. So know what flexibilities can be baked in from the very beginning.
So the final words from the consultant who works for 20 years in energy market disruption, challenging the old way of doing things. Thanks so much to everyone. We continue at 2 o'clock with the next session. Thanks and have a nice day.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again for these discussions, which showed to me that we are really looking at a paradigm shift. Thanks very much for your visions and for your insights looking forward to 2050. The next session will start at 2 o'clock Brussels time, and we would like you to join us to learn a little bit more when we look across European borders into Green Deal diplomacy. Stay tuned and hopefully see you back again at 2 o'clock Brussels time here on this channel.